Great show, by the way. We got Thomas Wasson here. We've got Sal Mercogliano, but we also have Clarissa Hawes, and you know what that means. We're going back to the courtroom with our top story again, where one man says non-compete clauses hurt his chances of being employed again. Clarissa Hawes has been following this story, and she joins us now this morning. Good morning, Clarissa. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on today.
Great to have you.
Good to have you as always. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on. We've got a story that we talked about yesterday in our headlines. We're going to get into the details. We've got TQL saying to this employee, hey, you violated your non-compete. Him saying, you know what, I was just looking for a job at an insurance company. How is that a violation? Talk to us a little bit about what's going on.
Sure. I spoke with Jacob Patterson's attorney, who is also his brother, who is a litigator at a top law firm in DC. And, he said that since, that even before he left TQL, he had tried to take a lesser demanding role. And because of he had 5 preteen kids, teenage kids, and his wife wanted, him to spend more time at home. And, when you're hustling and working, it's hard to find that work-life balance. And so he had first asked to work in a lesser role and was granted that, but then it became more demanding than his previous role. So he made the decision, even 2 weeks before he left TQL, he was in negotiations to go work for this asset-based trucking company, PBJ Express. And 2 weeks, and they kept going back and forth on if it violated his non-compete or not. And then they never came to an understanding. And so he did go ahead and go to work, which PBJ Express was a supplier of TQL. And so he thought it was all going to be, well, they had a great relationship with TQL at the time. And then, less than a month on the job, he was hit with a lawsuit. And that continued. They were still in talks to get the case dismissed and everything. And then, so he said, and then they said that they intended to file a motion to add PBJ Express to the lawsuit. And that's when he resigned from that trucking company to go to look at looking at being an insurance broker. And then they, kind of sabotaged his efforts there as well.
Under what? I mean, I know it's. I have a problem with this personally because this type of thing happened to me, and it sucks because somebody can sue you for any reason whatsoever. They don't even have to have any proof, and they can slap a lawsuit on you, and then you've got to defend yourself, and there you go. What is there any reason they're coming after him as an insurance broker? Was he doing that at TQL? I mean, why are they coming to him at that? Is there any ground or logic to that at all other than TQL's being a bunch of jerks?
Well, it happened that one of his friends, who was a former TQL, sales logistics manager, he went to work for this United, USI insurance company. Yeah. And there was they looked at his non-compete and there was no issue. So when Jacob, he's like, well, I worked there. There was no issue. So he's like, they started negotiating about bringing him on board and using his natural born sales talent. Some people have it and some people just don't, and to work as an insurance broker. And so there was a conversation, well, we do need to reach out to TQL's legal in-house counsel, Chris Brown, and, to just get his blessing before we, move forward. And kind of the gist of that conversation was it wouldn't be a good, wise business decision for USI to hire Jacob. And so they canceled any future employment opportunities for him there.
So the interesting thing about this case is obviously jumping from TQL to that first trucking company, would be a direct violation of the non-compete clause, right? Depending on what his roles were in the new role. But is there some kind of legal loophole, or I guess legal loophole that TQL is trying to hope to employ by saying now, you know what, now you can't broker anything, regardless of if it's freight, if it's insurance, whatever, because now they're targeting his employment at USI? Or is that, I guess I'm just kind of confused on how they would rationalize that.
Yes. And now I think it's kind of personal, that, Jacob, and the emails I've gotten is like, from former TQL employees and I'm on a Reddit kind of thread and following things there. And they're like, he was a top earner. He was a top guy. He made that company so much money. And then for him to just need, to step back and find a work-life balance, to keep his family together, why they continue to track him, like every job that he wants to go to, they prevent him, from being successful.
Yeah, it seems predatory or retaliatory at the least at this point. I could see possibly the first move going to PBJ Trucking, although it was asset-based and a client of that company, that could have been handled quite nicely to the benefit of both companies when that occurred, which would have been the smarter business decision and more, humane thing to do, right? More ethical thing to do.
Right.
But now it just seems like they're going after him. Is there any way he can countersue them for doing this, or does he just got to fight this stuff, or is he taking any action? He and his brother, I guess his brother is his lawyer. Are they like taking this to the moon as hey, let's call this now, let's change the name of TQL because you can't do this to me?
Yes, actually, his brother filed a lawsuit on his behalf about saying that it's harming his ability to find employment in this, and it's kind of like continued harassment, of him, and that he just wants to work and provide for his family, and that at every turn there's someone wanting to TQL is wanting to like kind of sabotage his future potential job opportunities. And so they filed the lawsuit on August 23rd, and even after Jacob had filed this resignation that he would no longer work for the trucking company anymore, they still, TQL did go forward and file a motion to add PBJ Express to the lawsuit, to his non-compete lawsuit. And so that will, so this 43 truck carrier is now going to be, part of this ongoing 15-month litigation. And where even he doesn't, last day was yesterday, he, was just spending those 2 weeks winding down, his responsibilities at that company. And they knew he was leaving, but still kind of came after him and the company.
So, Clarissa, we know that when it comes to non-competes in the freight space, they're often really difficult, really binding, and for employees who enter them, they typically don't have a lot of say around them, which is why companies like Steam Logistics and their now cohort of groups that they've brought in are so entrenched in this fight against non-competes. And it especially comes to a head in times like this, right, where you have TQL, which is the second largest logistics provider in the nation, fighting, as you mentioned, with this 43 truck carrier. And it's kind of this like massive guy versus this really tiny, not to call them insignificant, but on a scale of things, a very small player in the space. So when it comes to non-competes like this, why even bother? If you've got TQL, who is so giant, you've got an employee, did their due diligence, moved on, went to something smaller. Obviously, their clients are probably different. They're probably not running the same lanes, competing for the same type of freight. It almost seems just kind of ridiculous.
Yes, and they say it's a fear tactic that they use among current employees, and and for possible logistics, competitors to not hire TQL because they know that they could come after them as well. And so it's just that the in the lawsuit it says it's like that it's like holding a gun to these employees' heads because they don't, if they make the wrong move or get the wrong advice, they're facing a $500,000 when they have to pay attorney's fees when they lose. That's they have to incur
They have to pay
those
it regardless.
costs. And
Yeah,
So
you can't sue for your legal fees in this type
Right.
of case anyways. I've already learned that. So he's out the money to defend himself regardless of if he wins or not.
right.
So, Clarissa, last question for you really quickly before we go. Someone who sat under a non-compete for 3 years, just expired this past June. I'm pretty familiar with the way that living in like a right-to-work state enforces whether you can enforce a non-compete or not. When you're talking about a situation like this, does this non-compete go into effect in the place where TQL is based, or does it go into effect in the place where now the employee is based? And does that have any impact or effect on the legitimacy of the lawsuit, on if they can enforce that non-compete?
And that's a good question. And that's one, that people are still trying to, former TQL employees have said, I've never worked in Ohio. I never worked at the headquarters. I worked in Florida, or I worked in, Pennsylvania, where, they have kind of taken a stand on these no poach, non-compete type things and agreements. And, but yes, a lot of the cases, since they're filed in Ohio, which which allows the courts to kind of reform or revise, these non-competes. So as long as no one is saying this is, exactly what you need to follow, it's up to, they think that TQL will do the right thing and make these non-competes kind of make sense or draw a line of what you can and can't do. And because they're so overly broad, they like filing them in their, where their headquarters are located.
Yeah.
So
Well, it
Claremont
depends.
County,
Yeah,
Ohio.
the employee contract will that they signed will state in a case of it follows the laws of this state, this
right.
county, and where it'll be sued. Now the employee, once that happens, you can argue in the court to move it somewhere else because it makes logical sense, but the courts have to agree. And obviously wherever the TQL county and the laws there is favorable to supporting non-competes, otherwise they wouldn't put that in there, right? Whereas Tennessee does
Right.
not like to
Right.
Support non-competes. But you still have to go to court and defend yourself regardless. It's not like you get a non-compete and
You
they just
toss
say,
it
well,
out.
forget it. No,
Yep.
you still have to spend the money to defend yourself even in Tennessee, which sucks. But anyways, thank you so much, Clarissa. We'll be watching this because this is hopefully it continues to get a lot of press and it's a favorable outcome for him against TQL because I for one think it's BS and they should drop. I'm with Steam on this.
All right, Clarissa, thank you for joining us this morning. We'll talk to you again soon. Right now, head on over
thanks.
to the wall. We've got our first carrier update of the morning right now.